Welcome to Red, White, and Beau at the nexus of politics, patriotism, and passionate conversation. I'm your host, Beau Davidson. Joining me today is Allum Bokhari, the senior technology correspondent at Breitbart News and the author of the upcoming book, Deleted: Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election, currently available for pre-order on Amazon. He has one of the best networks of Silicon Valley insiders in tech journalism and has published numerous high-impact scoops, including the Google tape, Facebook's Hate Agents review list, and Google's The Good Censor. Allum, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Beau. Good to be on.
Thanks so much. Well, Allum, let's dive right into the issue du jour. This is big tech censorship, specifically of conservatives. So just as a backstory for those who don't know, Donald Trump Jr.'s Twitter account was restricted after he shared the viral press conference of America's frontline doctors. They said he violated the policy of sharing misleading or potentially harmful misinformation. Then your company, Breitbart, Google removed the video of the press conference, which had amassed about 17 million views, I believe, over the 8 hours it was posted. Twitter deleted the Breitbart Periscope live stream. It was also the top performing Facebook post in the world on Monday afternoon, if I'm correct. And Andy Stone, a Facebook rep, said it was removed for, quote, sharing false information about cures and treatments for COVID-19. So first question for you, Allum. I'd like to talk about the reasoning that these tech platforms provide. They all seem to use the World Health Organization and the CDC as almost biblical, as their unwavering standards, when we know that those organizations have been very wrong. They've been contradictory and misleading themselves. They say false information about cures and treatments. We are seeing studies all over the world that seem to be lending credence that hydroxychloroquine is effective, including a 2005 study by the NIH itself. And let's just say that the science is unsettled for the sake of this argument. Why censor this potentially life-saving medical information?
Personally, I think it's because journalists want them to censor it. And, it was journalists who started this massive, extremely stupid panic over hydroxychloroquine, which is, a very common anti-malaria drug. I'm not sure if it's a miracle cure for COVID-19. It's clearly not a deadly poison either. So the panic clearly isn't justified. As you said, doctors disagree, scientists disagree. The scientific consensus on topics always evolves, especially when we're dealing with a virus that's only 6 or so months old. Of course, the scientific consensus will change on that. So for Facebook and Google and these other tech companies to set themselves up as scientific authorities, censoring debate on the topic is insane. And also, it should be up to the public to decide, what information they receive, what information they can see, and not a handful of unaccountable tech elites in Silicon Valley who think they know better than everyone else.
Well, just this week, as big tech testifies on Capitol Hill, we've seen restrictions and or deletions of not just Donald Trump Jr., but Michael Flynn's lawyer, Sidney Powell, Madonna, ironically, for sharing the same information, and Breitbart, of course, for sharing this same medical information. Whenever I read about this, the wording always seems to be false information, false information. My question is, how do they know definitively it is false?
Well, it's a complete misdirection on their part. All of these departments in Silicon Valley that were set up to tackle so-called fake news or so-called misinformation or so-called election integrity or election interference, they were all set up right after Donald Trump won the election. They didn't exist before the 2016 election. So don't you think it's a massive coincidence that all of these departments it all emerged after Trump won the election? It's because there was this giant panic inside Silicon Valley after that election result. We saw it in video form when we got our hands on that 1-hour recording of Google executives a few days after the 2016 election in complete panic at the result. My Facebook sources tell me that a similar story on Facebook, total dismay that Trump won. And actually, my Facebook source says that when these fake news department, these election integrity departments were set up, the most anti-Trump people at the company joined those departments. So from the beginning, this tightening of control over the flow of information, this determination on the part of Silicon Valley to control what we see, what we can share, what publishers get ahead, what politicians get ahead on these platforms, that all kicked off really after the 2016 election in response to it, I think.
Uh, Alan, we know that CNN also shared an article earlier this month that seemed to validate also a lot of the claims about hydroxychloroquine. Why would CNN not share the same fate as conservatives, conservative figures and outlets?
Well, you know, journalists are kind of a protected class now in Silicon Valley, and you can see why. CNN's been encouraging the advertiser boycott against Facebook because Facebook allegedly isn't doing enough to censor the right. Believe it or not, Democrats in the mainstream media think Silicon Valley companies should be doing even more censorship than they're currently doing, and the press has been egging on that boycott against Facebook by its advertisers. So Silicon is very afraid of the mainstream press. They did a similar thing against YouTube back in 2017. They called it the adpocalypse. Ceaseless negative coverage in mainstream papers led to a massive advertiser boycott of that platform. And the result of all this is that Silicon Valley companies treat journalists, mainstream journalists anyway, as this kind of Brahmin protected class. You can't do anything to them. You have to listen to what they say. We've published stories at Breitbart showing that YouTube altered search results. They went in, added search results for the search term abortion to a file called the YouTube controversial query blacklist. That's YouTube's definition of what it was, a blacklist. Mm-hmm. They added that term to the file, and what they did was reorder search results for the abortion search term to favor the mainstream media and the left. And the reason they did that was because a Slate journalist reached out to the company and said, hey, there are too many pro-life videos in the top 10 search results for this term. This is outrageous. We're going to do a negative story about it. And within hours of that Slate journalist contacting YouTube, YouTube had completely reordered the search results in that highly political term.
So you're saying that CNN and a lot of the journalistic outlets have become immune to this sort of censorship, yet a Breitbart, a Western Journalism, Prager, any of these other companies would be subjected to a far greater, stricter level of scrutiny than CNN would be.
Absolutely, and you saw this most clearly during the controversy of the Covington High School kids. Oh, yeah. Those kids who were just wearing MAGA hats in Washington, D.C. and were harassed by this far-left Native American activist. What the press did was they went in it was a massive orgy of fake news. They said the kids were harassing the activists, even though they were just standing there wearing their hats. You had celebrities with verified check marks on Twitter threatening violence against these high school kids for the crime of wearing MAGA hats and standing still. And these tech platforms did almost nothing. They didn't clamp down on the fake news spread by the Washington Post and CNN, who have just settled with one of the high school kids, by the way, for, I believe, a very, very large sum of money. But the tech companies did nothing. This was obvious fake news. The video clips proved it was fake news. It led to a massive harassment campaign against kids, and the tech companies did nothing.
That said, I remember specifically that event directly and where I was and what I was saying at the time, and my caution actually for anyone putting out a story that wasn't the full picture. But that seems to be the method du jour of many journalistic outlets, is to shoot first, aim later, and we'll see what happens in the end. We don't really care about getting it right. We care about getting it first, and that seems to be one of the plagues that's in journalism right now. Let's just say hypothetically here that the hydroxychloroquine issue is a conspiracy theory. Let's just say that for the sake of this argument. Like many others on the internet, albeit this is a medically based theory, why would tech delete this one specific theory and not, let's say, a JFK assassination theory or a UFO theory, or even one that supports vitamins and supplements? What's the difference?
There is no difference, frankly. And even if you do consider these things to be conspiracy theories, the question is, why do these tech companies get to decide for us? It's almost as if they consider their public and the people who use these platforms to be total morons who can't decide for themselves whether something is a conspiracy theory or whether it's true. And the media likes to whip up panic over certain videos they accuse of being conspiracy theories based by pointing out the number of views they get. The number of views on a video doesn't correlate to the number of people who believe. You have to believe that public are complete ones who will get duped by anything on the internet to believe the so-called fake news panic in the first place. And even Mark Zuckerberg said right after the 2016 election, when he was being blamed for allowing so-called fake news to spread on the platform, that it's unfair to Trump supporters to say they were just duped by fake news and that's why they voted for Donald Trump. This is what progressives believe about Trump voters, that they're all just morons who are deluded by conspiracy theories and deluded by fake news, and that's why they vote for Donald Trump. They can't accept the possibility that people might actually disagree with their agenda, and that's why they oppose it.
I would say the same would probably be true about the documentary Plandemic, at least the first installment of it. I recall I did a commentary video about that, and I noticed it was removed from YouTube, I believe, within the first week or a couple of days. Why permit that to be removed, but not, let's say, Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth? Aren't they both fueling the same amount of conjecture?
Well, over the past 4 years, I've seen one of the biggest mainstream is in my living memory, certainly the Russiagate panic. This idea that Donald Trump was somehow in collusion with Russians. I remember Rachel Maddow, in which she speculated without any evidence that Donald Trump was somehow being favorable to Vladimir Putin because Putin had some sort of blackmail video on Trump. No evidence of this whatsoever. And the mainstream media get to push this on every social media platform you think of with no repercussions, even though these are massive, massive claims about the leader of the free world. And this is supposedly a vast Russian conspiracy that doesn't exist. So we've seen that go in the last 4 years. So the double standards with these social media platforms are pretty apparent.
Well, we know that Jeff Ingersoll, I believe you wrote about this actually today. I was reading your article. Jeff Ingersoll, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller, also has seen manually operated suppression, which Google CEO Sundar Pichai neither confirmed nor denied, it seems like. They compared the Daily Caller to violent extremists and are blacklisted. Why is this happening, Allum?
Violent extremist is another word that these tech companies like to use. It's one of these flexible words like hate speech or fake news or misinformation that they can stretch to cover their political opponents and conveniently exempt their political allies from it. Tech companies, leftists, mainstream media journalists, they love these flexible, subjective words that they can use as smears. Why is this happening? Well, first of all, I'll say it's happened to a lot of conservative news outlets. I've heard from journalists at the Gateway Pundit who said they can't, similar to what the Daily Caller said, that you type in the exact headline of an article from these websites and Google won't bring it up. They'll bring up other websites instead. I think the reason this is happening is because simply Google must have made a decision after the 2016 election that they're going to tighten controls and tighten censorship on its search engine and control what information people see based on increasingly arbitrary political criteria. And in fact, we've obtained a document from inside Google called The Good Censor. This was written by Google's own researchers. And it says Google and other platforms did shift towards censorship. That's Google's words, not mine, shift towards censorship after 2016. So we know they've done this. We know they're tightening controls. And it's apparent from the search analysis and the traffic analysis that conservative publishers have been the biggest losers. And that's totally not surprising to me, given how Google's leaders responded to the 2016 election.
Yeah, you seem to have noticed a pattern in this, and I know that you study it regularly. You know, the big tech four are testifying this week on Capitol Hill, and these issues are being raised by the likes of Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz. Allum, do you believe that they will be able to get to the bottom of the censorship while they are testifying? And do you think they'll be able to change anything?
You know, we've caught these tech companies red-handed on a number of occasions. We've seen them openly ban Donald Trump's biggest supporters from their platforms. I really think the time for committees and hearings and talk is over. I think Republicans need to get their act together and actually do something about these tech platforms. You know, Jim Jordan said on Tucker Carlson yesterday, working on Section 230 reform. That's nice, but my question is, why wasn't it done in 2017, 2018, when Republicans controlled the executive and the legislature? You know, this is one of probably the biggest threat to the re-election prospects of Republicans is unchecked big tech bias. And I really think Republicans missed their opportunity to change the laws and change the regulations, because right now these massive tech platforms that have unprecedented control over the flow of information, unprecedented power to manipulate us because they know far more about us than any other entity. They're completely unchecked. There's no law preventing them from meddling in the election if they want to. There's no law preventing them from censoring people if they want to. Maybe the executive can do something by defining it as a, in-kind campaign contribution.
Right.
Maybe we can redefine the scope of Section 230 to prevent them, to make it easier to sue these platforms for unfair suspensions. But it's all coming way too late, I think.
Yeah, well, I'd like to get to Section 230 in a minute. I've got that coming up. Mark Zuckerberg has consistently said he doesn't want Facebook to be the, quote, arbiter of truth. But there's no question that is what Facebook is doing, is it not?
Absolutely, and Mark Zuckerberg does this sort of double act where he'll go out in public and defend free speech and defend the free flow of information and make a big play of standing up for the Democrats saying, well, no, I won't censor politicians. But, he's already censored politicians. Tommy Robinson, a political candidate in the UK, well-known critic of Islam, radical Islam, banned from the platform. Laura Loomer, Republican candidate in the primary election in Florida's 21st district, banned from the platform. So this argument that Zuckerberg is making that, free speech is important, we won't censor politicians, doesn't make sense when he's already clamping down on free speech and censoring politicians. Maybe Facebook is better than Google comparatively, maybe better than Twitter comparatively, but that's a pretty low bar, in my opinion.
That's a great segue to my next question, which is, of the big four, which do you find to be the most suppressive and draconian?
Oh, that's a good question. I certainly think Google is the one Republicans should be most afraid of, because the amount of power Google has over the flow of information is unlike any other company. Keep in mind, Google owns 90% or more of the search market. They're completely dominant. They have no serious competitor in that. Most people do not go beyond the first 5 results on Google search. Majority of people just stick to those top results. So by manipulating those top results and having control over what goes up there and what we see, Google essentially controls everything we see on the internet, everything we search for, every new topic that you might be curious about, you're going to go to Google to find out about it. So Google controls your access to that information. And what's more, people don't assume Google searches are going to be biased. So their critical faculties aren't engaged when they're making a Google search in the same way that they might be when they're watching a Fox News report or a CNN report, where they might be aware there's some sort of editorial agenda behind this. Experts on search engines, Dr. Robert Epstein in particular, who's spent years looking at the way search engines can change our political decisions, he's found that if it wanted to, Google could shift up to 10% of undecided voters towards Donald Trump's opponent in the next election. That's an enormous margin, more than enough to carry the swing states, especially when you consider the fact that Donald Trump won by a few 100,000 votes in those swing states in 2016. And the other thing to remember is 2020 is going to be harder than 2016. In 2016, the establishment were caught napping. They thought they had it in the bag. They had, and you saw this from executives, but they're shocked. They had no idea, no inkling that Donald Trump could win. They thought it was all going to be a Clinton. But they don't think that this time around. They're not going to be complacent. And we're really going to see this big tech censorship thing is part of a wide elite evolution. Never before have the elites merged every tool in their arsenal, from tech censorship to media bias to weaponizing the judiciary, everything you can think of to sort of fight back against Donald Trump.
Yeah, so as we segue from censorship to election interference, this seems to be exactly what you're talking about. You contend that tech censorship is the greatest threat to Donald Trump's reelection chances, greater even than, say, voter fraud. Digress a little bit and explain what you mean by that. Is this what you're referring to when you talk about this sort of subliminal way that Google is doing things unconsciously to voters?
Absolutely. And keep in mind, no one in human history has had the amount of control over the flow of information, over political discourse that these handful of oligarchic companies have. I mean, even the Soviet KGB couldn't compare to this because they didn't have the technological capabilities to control everything. These companies do. Almost all of political discourse is on the internet now. And if you add up all the prominent right-wingers who've been banned from platforms like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, that amounts to billions of lost impressions in favor of Donald Trump. Donald Trump used those platforms, and his supporters used those platforms in 2016 to bypass the mainstream media's control over the narrative. And Silicon Valley is going to make sure they don't have that opportunity in 2020. That's in addition to controlling the search results and controlling the news stories we see at the top of our book feed, at the top of Twitter feed, and at the top of Google search results. That's what I mean when I say Silicon Valley is the biggest threat to Donald Trump's re-election chances, because they just have this absolute chokehold over information. And in fact, the title of my book is Deleted Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. I think it's apparent to anyone who's been paying attention that's what their goal is. It's what their goal has been since Donald Trump won that election 4 years ago.
And where is the research that's leading to these conclusions you're making? Are these self-admissions by Google itself? How have you come to learn about the type of censorship that these big tech companies have upon the conservative movement and, let's say, interfering in the 2020 election?
Well, I'd say it's a mix of things. The most obvious evidence is the permanent bans of so many prominent supporters of Donald Trump from these platforms, and the what that takes away from Trump in terms of the ability to mobilize and enthuse his supporters online and convey information to them that doesn't go through mainstream media channels. I mean, just a few examples: Laura Loomer, Paul Joseph Watson, Alex Jones. All of these people were big supporters of Donald Trump in 2016, and there won't be on many of these platforms in 2020. More examples: Carl Benjamin, Tommy Robinson, Gavin McInnes, many other examples. Not to mention all the thousands of people who get kicked off for spurious reasons from the grassroots who we don't hear about because they're not prominent figures. Right. That's one obvious example that's in plain sight. The other proof we see of their intentions is, as you said, what they've said themselves. So Project Veritas once obtained a video of a Google executive, Jen Janai, talking about how they don't want 2016 to happen again. And I obtained a video published at Breitbart of Google executives, including Kent Walker, their global policy chief, talking about how populism needs to be a blip in history. We saw Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, comparing Trump voters to extremists and talking about using Google's anti-extremism program, Jigsaw, which has a redirect method to alter what people are seeing on Google if they're believed to be extremists, talking about that in the context of the Trump election. And also my sources inside Silicon Valley, inside these companies. As I said, that Facebook insider I know says that all the anti-Trump people joined the fake news departments and misinformation departments, and my Google insiders as well. Dissent inside these companies is not tolerated. The far left employees are allowed to do almost whatever they want. So I know that from inside the companies. And the final aspect, of course, is the research. People like Robert Epstein, the search engine experts, saying tech companies can manipulate voters if they choose. And, the fact that there's no oversight to stop them from doing so. They can do it. There's no law stopping them.
Yeah, let's get to that oversight issue specifically. I think this is where the American public, I had never heard of it before, but I think people need to know this because I've heard it said that the First Amendment and the suppression does not apply to big tech because they are merely platforms. They can set their own terms of service. They get away with this under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which says no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. And they're using this under good faith. Good faith is what that's their modus operandi, that they can get away with removing what they consider to be hate speech, however they determine that. Do you think that these companies are abusing Section 230? And is there any way to fix this?
They are for sure abusing that law. I mean, it's a very broken law because what tech companies have been able to claim in court is that they have the First Amendment rights of publishers to pick and choose whose content gets to be seen. They can edit the content of their users however they see fit. So they're claiming the First Amendment rights of publishers to ban whoever they want on editorial grounds, while at the same time they're claiming the legal immunities of Section 230, which is meant to apply to platforms, not publishers. Right. They're claiming those legal immunities to prevent themselves from being sued for defamation or sued for banning people. A regular publisher, if they defame you, you can sue them. That's what happened to CNN and Washington Post in the Covington Gate scandal. But these tech companies are exempt. And the reason why that law exempts them is because it's assumed that these platforms will just be conduits for what other people say. But what tech companies are also claiming is that actually, no, they're the publishers. They also control what people say, and they have a right to do that. So they're trying to have it both ways. And because the law is written fairly poorly, courts have allowed them to get away with it. So we for sure need reform of that specific law. But we also need just executive oversight in general. These companies can't be allowed to just manipulate elections without, even if they just have the power to manipulate elections. The sheer amount of ability they have to manipulate the information we see and manipulate our behavior, that requires oversight, even if they're not using it. We need to know that they're not using it.
Right. Allum, you published the famous Google tape where we referenced it earlier, where execs mourn the 2016 Trump victory, yet they claim that their personal views do not direct their platform decisions. We are seeing that is false, correct? That every bit of thought in that video has had a direct impact upon their business decisions.
Well, it's as Matt Gaetz said at yesterday's hearing. It's not hard to connect the dots. We caught them on tapes, in this crazed panic of anti-Trump sentiments, saying they wanted to make the populist movement a blip, and now we're seeing the absolute crushing impact they've had on the traffic of conservative websites. 99.7%. That's how much Breitbart's visibility on Google search has gone down since 2017. We have 0.3% of the visibility today than we did in the run-up to the 2016 election. So Google wants to claim that their rabid anti-Trump sentiments don't affect their products, yet this is what we're seeing. They want us to believe it's just a coincidence. I think your viewers are smart enough to connect the dots there.
Right. And it seems it has influenced most directly by their own admission, as you said, and by some research that's being done. We haven't covered Instagram yet, but I do want to get to Instagram because of the recent removal of one of the app stickers that they had that said mute white people. It sparks concern as well. How does a sticker that obtuse make it onto their platform, and why do you think they took it down?
Well, Silicon Valley companies, like much of the modern left, have a complete blind spot when it comes to racism against white people, and sexism against men as well. These are two forms of discrimination that much of the left considers to be okay or not discrimination at all. I know intersectional theorists, these crazy gender studies, critical studies professors at places like Berkeley, one of their favorite arguments is that you can't be racist against white people because racism is, they call it prejudice plus power. And because white people have all the power in society, you can't be racist against them. Obviously an absurd argument. I don't think unemployed blue collar workers in Michigan and the Rust Belt have power in any sense of the word.
No.
But yeah, we've seen this before. We've seen Twitter. Twitter allowed tweets from Sarah Jong, the New York Times writer, in which she compares white people speaking on the internet to dogs pissing on fire hydrants. So those are her words. Used the hashtag cancel white people. Said she enjoyed being cruel to old white men. Twitter not only allowed those tweets to stay up, totally contrary to their hate speech policies, but then they verified her. They gave her a stamp of approval. So it doesn't surprise me that Instagram has done a similar thing by allowing this sticker you mentioned to stay up. The left thinks it's perfectly okay to hate on certain people because of the color of their skin. Actually, I'm surprised that Republicans and even the Trump campaign aren't talking about this more. Most ordinary Americans, no matter what race, creed, or color they are, despise the idea that you can hate people or discriminate against them or abuse them because of the color of their skin.
Right.
You put Sarah Jeong's tweets in front of a Black American, a white American, Chinese American, whoever you can think of, I guarantee most of them will say that's a racist tweet.
However, evidently those in the decision-making powers at Instagram decided mute white people. Someone thought that was a good idea, probably more than one person. And I would say that this is a way for maybe to direct the culture into deluding them into believe that that is actually true. So you can create sort of a herd mentality. They did eventually take it down. And I'm just wondering why they backed off of that. Because it seems like they would just go full tilt ahead, full steam ahead, and not worry about what people think about it, particularly conservatives.
Well, they might have been thinking of the fact that Google faced a massive lawsuit a few years ago on behalf of James Damore and several other employees of the company, alleging that it was filed by Harmeet Dillon, one of the best lawyers on the big tech issue. And it alleged that Google discriminates on the basis of political viewpoints, so against conservatives, libertarians, non-progressives, but also on the basis of race and gender against white men and against Asian men. So Instagram might have been considering that when they took the sticker down.
That's quite possible.
But yeah, we've been seeing more and more of this extremely racist ideology spreading from the left. Google once gave a handout to certain managers, warning them to be aware of signs of, I believe, the white dominant culture, values of the white dominant culture. And among those values were meritocracy, objectivity, and various other things that most people, I believe, are in favor of. They're saying, well, these are white values. So it's a very racist, nasty ideology that's spreading from the intersectional left, and it's definitely spreading into these tech companies.
Yeah, I believe that was actually posted as well in the Museum of African American History, if I'm correct. I believe Ben Shapiro reported.
Yes, very similar set of things they were saying were part of white culture, including being on time. Are they saying non-white people are never punctual? That's crazy.
I didn't realize that was part of the tyrannical Caucasian patriarchy. I did not know that being on time was part of that. But that's taxpayer funded. Taxpayer funded that we are funding this sort of mentality, which makes you wonder again, just in terms of brainwashing, what's going on. Allum, what recourse do conservatives have? We're seeing what's happening this week on Capitol Hill, but do you expect the president to push back harder? I read that this week the administration has filed a petition to the FCC for clarification of Section 230 to know what that means. Is that the best they can do? What recourse do conservatives have to push back?
Well, again, they really should have started sooner. They should have made better executive appointments early on in the administration to really hold these tech companies to account. Instead, what we saw was, even the Trump administration, Republicans giving them even more protection, similar to Section 230 in USMCA in the trade bill. There's another clause in there that says tech companies are allowed to take down content they consider to be objectionable. But we are seeing some steps in the right direction. This petition to the FCC is very positive, I think. And people in the administration now, Adam Kandayeb has had the right ideas about Section 230 for a very long time. You can read his old Wall Street Journal articles in which he points out the problems with the law. So there are good people in the administration right now working on this issue. The question is, will it be in time? I'm not sure it will be. We're less than 100 days to the election. These tech companies have already suspended some of Trump's and banned some of Trump's most prominent supporters, denying him a huge part of his digital grassroots. Now they're even censoring the president himself. They're banning Amazon banned his Twitch account. Twitter's deleting his tweets. Facebook banned a Trump campaign ad a while ago, even though they said they wouldn't. And this is just intensifying. So yes, the Trump administration is doing some good things. They are pushing back now. Will it be in time for the election? That's an open question. But certainly, if Biden gets in, you're going to see even more censorship because the Democrats encourage this sort of thing. They encourage companies to clamp down on right-wingers. They encouraged the banking industry to do so under the Obama administration. They had something called Operation Choke Point that essentially told banks to go after certain types of businesses called high-risk businesses, and among them were firearm manufacturers. So the Democrats are all about using the private sector as the means to tyrannize the right, and they're going to do more of that under Biden. So I think anyone who's concerned about this issue has to hope that Trump and the Republicans win.
Yeah, so as we head into this home stretch before November 3rd, you expect to see more big tech's continued suppression of conservatives, and which would be an aid for Joe Biden's campaign, his lackluster campaign. We know that Twitter has been dinging Trump's account, but has not touched Joe Biden's at all, has not touched it, as far as we know.
Never seen anything done to Joe Biden's account whatsoever. Never seen anything done to mainstream media accounts that regularly push the Russiagate conspiracy even today. So yeah, absolute double standard, clearly targeted at the right, and absolutely in line with what these tech executives have said in statements that were recorded on video. So it's crazy to me that some people still believe that tech bias isn't a thing. And watching the hearing yesterday was very amusing, because what you saw was Democrats on the one hand going after these big tech companies for manipulating search results or manipulating their platforms against competitors, commercial competitors. But when it came to the possibility of them doing the same against ideological competitors, the Democrats just said, "Oh, that's a fringe conspiracy theory. That's rubbish." So on the one hand, they accept that these tech companies may discriminate against their commercial competitors, and that's an antitrust issue, but they don't believe it's possible when it comes to their political opponents, even though politics has a huge impact on companies' bottom line. It's a big interest for them.
So with more Americans tuning into social media for their news and not the traditional mainstream outlets, I know this is really the basis of your book. How many votes do you expect to be swung to the left as a result of what they're doing? Is it enough to change this election? I think I know the answer to this, but I'm just curious how many votes you think this could potentially shift things.
Unquestionably, it's enough to swing the election. I mean, you look at Robert Epstein's research and the percentages he's talking about that just Google could do. We're talking about tens of millions of votes. I think he said up to 10%. That was his last estimate. That's more than enough to swing the election. That's more than the margin that any Democrat candidate would need to beat Donald Trump, especially when you consider how close the last election was and how close this one will be in those swing states. So yeah, no question that they could swing the election.
Is the Trump momentum enough to overcome that?
Well, I suppose we'll find out. That's a big question. So I've never seen, even looking back through history, the kind of elite counter-revolution we're seeing today. Maybe against Nixon. Maybe there was a similar backlash against Nixon's election. But the amount of tools and weapons the Democrats and the establishment elites are mobilizing, be it the media, be it voter fraud, be it big tech bias, is just unprecedented.
Yeah. Well, Allum Bokhari, thank you so much. And everyone, please go out and pre-order his book on Amazon before Jeff Bezos finds a way to censor him. Thank you so much, Allum.
Thanks, Beau. Great to be on.
The simple gifts we get.